have a little housekeeping to do where all lines are muted. And we've got, it's being recorded, right, Laurel? Are we recording? Great. Please use the chat for technical issues. Submit your questions in the Q&A. And you can, I think you can upvote. We're hoping you can. We had a little technical difficulties on that. For time's sake, we have full bios of all the speakers, and we have a list of all the resources in a doc, which Mary Mulcair Jones is going to put in the link to in the chat right now, and she'll be putting it in later again too, in case people need it. And you can start putting your questions in right away. You can start putting them in now if you want to. Dave's going to be answering the questions in about an hour. We'll see how the presentations go. We're using, well, here's the people we're helping out today. Thank you, everybody. These are all Montana people we have just an amazing team. And so today we're going to be just defining Megafire a little bit, going over some of the solutions. The roadblocks are actually going to be coming in with a lot of our videos when we start talking about Fix Our Forest Act and what it does and doesn't do. And then Dave will come in, Dave Atkins, and I'll do his bio at 6 Mountain Time at the beginning of the second hour. Right before the second hour, so 5 minutes before, we're going to stop so that everybody can look at the questions and put in their questions and take a little break if you have to. And then we'll start right back in. And here we go. These are the presenters for tonight. Dana's information is being used. I'm not using the video for that. We're going to actually start with Danielle Watson from American Forests, and her presentation on the national call, part of it. Then we're going to go to Mac.
There's been a lot of snow and rain up here today. Okay, here we go. We're back.
Right.
Computer hiccuped.
Yeah, got the hiccups, that's for sure. And for opposition to the bill, we worked off of the letter to Congress by the 137 environmental groups that do not support the act. But we have gotten a lot of questions already that are going to be covering a lot of those, a lot of the opposition. So, so we'll have at it. So let's.
So we lost you when you're talking about Matt Weiner on your screen.
Okay, I will continue. I'll just finish that. He's a CEO and founder of Megafire Action. Their byline is that they want to solve Megafire in 10 years or something, that it is solvable. So, and he was presenting, he was invited by Senator Bennett to talk at the hearing that was held last week. So just to define megafires, they're fast spreading, large scale, over 100,000 acres, and can be very much more than that. They have grown, fire growth rates have increased by nearly 400% over the last 2 decades. This is amazing how the extreme fires have doubled in number, and then there's also 8 times more acres burned. And in terms of losses of buildings and insurance losses, it's 5 times what it was 20 years ago. So it's hugely impactful. Next slide. So what's at stake? This is just a little summation, maybe. I mean, there's so many ways that Megafire, especially, is degrading the wildlife and habitat, the lost carbon storage, conversion from forest to non-forest, which means with a megafire, it burns so completely that it's hard for forest to grow back, and you'll end up with prairie or something, grasslands. It's a huge issue is degrading watersheds. That was brought up by Senator Bennett. He focused on that. Erosion and being prone to floods, obviously wildfire smoke, all the lost lives and possessions and trauma, and then we're heading to an insurance crisis. But I want to read a quote from the Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission report. This commission started in 2021 and has a report out in 2024 in September or 23. And it's really well respected and very thorough. And what they say is, what we are experiencing today will be dwarfed by wildfires anticipated within the next 1 or 2 generations. This is a wildfire crisis, but more than that, it should be treated as an issue of national security and responded to with the same urgency and attention. This crisis has a direct nexus with emergency management, public health, and land management. Just the urgency of this is just so apparent. Next slide, please. And why is this happening? This is Dana's chart about attribution of wildfires to climate change, and this is even old, so it's probably much higher now. It's basically doubled the amount of wildfires. Next slide. So this is also from the Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission report, just looking at what they are looking at in terms of overarching themes, ways to deal with this. So funding the investment, and that would be also like investment in towns and communities, urgent new approaches, collaboration is always important, proactive action, planning, mitigating, and recovering with resilience, enabling beneficial fire, workforce support and expansion, and then modernized tools for decision-making, science, data, and technology. So when you're looking at these clips from these experts, just keeping this in mind, are these in the Fix Our Forest Act? And if you could go to the next slide, I think we're going to head to
and Scott Peters.
Thank you.
And then it passed very quickly out of the House. The vote was 271 to 141, which means that 64 Democrats joined all Republicans in support, which is actually up 9 Democrats from the last time they voted on it. So not a lot, but it is showing that there's some growing bipartisan support for the bill. All right, here we go. I'm not going to go section by section because it is a big bill and includes a lot of things, but here are some of the highlights, so feel free to follow along. I will note that I'm not necessarily talking about them in priority order. I tried to, as much as I could, go in order while I'm talking about them on as they go through the sections. So what we love about the bill, one of the things, section 102 creates a fire shed center. This has really strong bipartisan support and matches the Wildfire Commission recommendations that I mentioned, which gives more dedicated resources and helps to drive coordination across the agencies. Section 111 adds tribes to the Good Neighbor Authority, which encourages cross-boundary work and improves shared stewardship. There are also a couple of other sections that better incorporate tribes into existing authorities or call for closer collaboration, which we really appreciate and encourage in all legislation. So then there's section 205, which is about seeds of success. It talks about enhancing the domestic supply chain for seeds, again, calling for interagency cooperation, including that with the Department of Defense, which again, great, and promotes native and fire-resistant vegetation, particularly within the WUI. One of the main things that we're really excited about is this section 206, which is a program to support priority reforestation and restoration projects for the Department of the Interior. American Forest actually worked really closely with the Hill staff to get this included in the last version of the bill as an amendment, and now it's included as part of the bill this going forward. DOI reforestation needs have kind of been overshadowed by the Forest Service. We know that the Forest Service has a big backlog, and the Replant Act, which we were heavily involved in as well, and have been involved in, has made great strides for the reforestation backlog on the Forest Service, but that same attention hasn't been paid to the Department of Interior. So this helps to start addressing that by identifying lands that are unlikely to experience natural regeneration without our help, and then establishes those priority projects, including activities related to appropriate seed and seedling availability. There's also a really great provision in section 301 on biochar innovations and opportunities, which creates a biochar demonstration project. Hopefully you all know about biochar. If you don't, please Google that and go down a rabbit hole later today. It's a carbon-rich material produced by heating organic material in a low oxygen environment. So basically it's charcoal for improving soil health. It presents a really unique opportunity to create outsized value and durable carbon storage from the lowest quality wood wastes. It has the potential to really expand restoration opportunities by helping to bring back the industries and the infrastructure needed to do all those activities, all while storing more carbon and improving soil health and growing economic opportunities in rural communities. Then there's section 303, which we're also really excited about, which has a public-private wildfire technology deployment and demonstration projects. It's again a pilot program for new and innovative wildfire prevention, detection, communication, and mitigation technologies. This relates really well to our platform that I mentioned before and the technology recommendations that we have included in there. And then finally, there's a whole section on white oak resilience. That is something, that it's very specific because I think it was someone's sort of pet project, but we're really excited about that. And I think it's really something good to move forward, and glad it was introduced in the bill. All right, next we're moving to the things I call what we're fine with or what we're okay with. The first being section 106, and this starts to get into the ones where maybe other folks have had, some concerns. So I'll try to address some of those as we go through it. So section 106 amends the Healthy Forest Restoration Act by expanding categorical exclusions to 10,000 acres. Now, the U.S. Forest Service has said it needs additional categorical exclusions. And they did a wide body of analysis showing and helped show them that about 7,500 acres had findings of no significant impact. So that was just an estimate, but that was what they came up with when they tried to scour to see what the categorical exclusion should be. But when questioned on that, even the chief of the Forest Service agreed that 10,000 acres is reasonable and appropriate number, given that both are sort of arbitrary numbers, and especially given the state of the crisis. And that's how American Forest feels about it, is that given the wildfire crisis, we know we need to find ways to move faster and reduce administrative costs of management. And this is one way that we can do that. Now, we do note that this could benefit from a requirement around planning to ease any worries around lack of stakeholder input. So that is something we'll be working with the Senate offices on to see if they may be open to including a requirement around collaborative planning. Next is section 122, which is called the Cottonwood Fix, which essentially repeals a 2015 ruling from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, ones that the leaders of the Forest Service under both Democratic and Republican administrations says need to be addressed. It relates to reconsultation requirements with the Fish and Wildlife Service under the Endangered Species Act. This provision in particular clarifies that there's no need to stop all management activities allowed under a forest management plan when new information on an endangered species or critical habitat is uncovered. So that might seem problematic at first, but the key to understand is to understand the difference between unit level planning and project level planning. The unit level is where the broader forest management plan is developed at the forest level. So the current rule allows any new information to halt all projects within the unit, creating a procedural loop that potentially leads to a never-ending procedural loop. It also doesn't factor in the types of projects that they might be delaying, including those that may improve habitat or wildfire resilience. Westerman actually used this analogy, but I think it's good, so I'm going to do it. But the analogy is thinking of zoning laws, and this would be like reconsidering entire zoning of an area every time there was an issue with one parcel. And so I think that kind of puts it in perspective. In addition, this rule is kind of wonky in that it only applies to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, so land within the Ninth Circuit, which, of course, does not align with the National Forest System regions or their units, which creates further confusion down the line. And again, just to reiterate one more time, like the unit level planning, the project level planning are two different things. At the project level, they would still consider these any new information. So one of the things that we're also thinking about with this, and folks have suggested when they've analyzed it, is that an in-between solution could be to where instead of any new information, you could scale it back to so peer-reviewed science that comes up, things like that. But like I said, right now, this is very broad and it doesn't have to be, it literally can be any. That's how it's written, is that it's any new information. And so that creates an immediate stop on all projects. And it's like I said, really problematic. And I do think that there's more agreement around it than there is disagreement. All right, so finally, the what needs improvement. And this is the thing, these are the things we're going to try to work with in the Senate. The litigation reform in section 121, we know that in particular, that section about limitation on claims requires claims to be filed within 120 days and parties have to have participated in the public comment period. We know this is the biggest roadblock for broader bipartisan support. And we do actually agree that the language is a little unclear and may even lead to more litigation rather than less. So, you know, we would love to see that cleaned up a bit and are definitely going to work on that with the champions. Some other sections, section 204, and there's another section too related to utility lines and categorical exclusions around utility lines. We don't really think that either of these provisions are particularly helpful and in fact may detract from the bigger issue around the maintenance of the grid infrastructure. So it's making it seem like it's a vegetation management issue when we see it as more of a grid maintenance issue and something that should be addressed, you know, by the electric utilities in that way. Finally, there's a couple of sections on studies related to relocating the Forest Service headquarters or studies related to Forest Service policies. And while we love a good study, you know, those definitely require resources, and we don't think that they're probably the best use of resources at this time. unfortunately, they're kind of priorities for Westerman. So there are things we can live with because they're just studies, but again, don't think that they're best use of resources, and do hope that perhaps maybe we can eliminate those. One of the big limitations of all of these is none of the provisions come with funding authorizations. And many of them, as you may imagine, really need funding to be actually implemented and effective. And so that's another big hurdle and a big criticism that actually has been weighed, and that is definitely true, and we need to work on that in the Senate. All right, so what's next? Again, this bill is really in a good position to move. It's one of the only bipartisan bills out there. And again, not bipartisan with a couple of people, but bipartisan in a growing sort of coalition. There's key Senate offices now working on it. Senator Hickenlooper, who's a Democrat out of Colorado, as well as Senator Bennett, also a Democrat out of Colorado. Senator Wyden out of Oregon, Democrat, and Senator Sheehy, who's the new senator out of Montana, who's a Republican. Those are sort of the key folks. Not surprising that they're all Western folks, even though, again, this bill has been referred to the Senate Ag Committee. A lot of those folks on the Senate Ag Committee, if you look, are in states that this isn't particularly relevant for. Right. So I think we're going to look to the leadership of those folks that I mentioned to really negotiate this and move it forward. One of the things, and I think Flannery mentioned this too, I think we need to work on education with other groups, right? Other coalitions, other partner organizations, to try to educate them on the broader benefits of this bill, and then have them work with us on some of these improvements so that we can hopefully get them across the finish line. I also want to mention just some things that the bill doesn't address and will need other bills to tackle, right? This isn't actually a comprehensive bill. I know on the site they say it is, but it's not comprehensive in that it doesn't solve the whole problem. So a few things that need to be addressed are already present in some other bills that we hope will be introduced soon. And then some are going to be addressed in the Farm Bill. For instance, we're hoping to expand the reforestation, nursery, and genetics resources program, otherwise known as RINGER. If you hear people refer to it as RINGER, we're hoping to expand that in the Farm Bill to really help state and tribal nurseries better keep pace with the reforestation needs. Urban forestry is also listed here. You might be like, why? I don't understand. Well, because healthy urban forests help support healthy forests across the landscape. Most infestations are first identified in cities, especially port cities, where international trade, which is a primary vector for insects and pathogens, is prevalent. These pests then spread to the rural and wildland forests, where the full spectrum of forest values are at risk. So we really see those as interconnected, not this separate piece over here. So I wanted to call that out as well. Oh, no, not there yet. Okay, so bottom line, will this bill fix the wildfire crisis? No. But will our forests be in a better position with the help of the provisions in this bill? Absolutely. The status quo pace of planning and management is simply inadequate to meet the crisis that we're facing. I'll direct you back to Brian's quote.
Now.
What kind of fire?
There we go. So now we're going to skip over to Matt Weiner. And happened last week. The hearing, it was really interesting, and I think we got to hear from a tribal member and how he was interested in categorical exclusions. Adam Schiff was saying how the logging provisions that a lot of groups don't like, he thinks those are going to get fixed. And Cory Booker was there to bring up the other section 121 is the big bugaboo for many groups. So he was interested in working on that, even though he's not on the committee. So there was a lot of great testimony, and I think if you want to try to look at that sometime. It's interesting. I think she's almost there.
Yeah.
There was
Are you
somebody.
seeing it large now by chance?
Yes.
Okay, good. So we're going to go to 46 minutes. It's quite a long testimony, this Senate committee hearing. So I'm going to start at minute 46.
And the Fix Our Forest
46.
Act is an excellent place to start.
That working?
Before I dive into the support for the bill, I want to make one thing clear. We cannot fix our forests if we have nobody to fix our forests. For decades, we've completely failed our workforce, especially our wildland firefighters who've been asked to do too much with too little for far too long. The current firings and freezings are only making things worse, but this is a long-standing problem. It's appalling that we're continuing to put our firefighters in this position, and a permanent, well-resourced federal wildfire workforce remains an urgent need, and Congress should step in to stop the bleeding. Onto the bill. There's a lot to like about the Fix Our Forest Act, but we see it largely as focused on two challenges: permitting reform and technology adoption, both essential to scaling up effective wildfire mitigation. Let me start with permitting reform. We know selective thinning in prescribed fire can restore ecosystem balance and reduce risk, yet we're nowhere near meeting the scale that's needed. Last year, the Forest Service treated 800,000 acres of the highest risk landscapes, which was a record high, but is still far short of the millions of acres a year needed to reach our targets. And we know that treatment saves money. Senators have before you a slide deck from our friends at Vibrant Planet that underscores the value of mitigation investments. A recent analysis by them found that $76 million in projects protected $2.1 billion in structures. The ROI is undeniable. One major barrier to this is the slow and costly permitting process. The Forest Service estimates that planning and assessments consume 40% of direct work and can frequently lead to years of delays in getting projects off the ground. I do want to note that there are legitimate reasons to be concerned about changes to NEPA. Lessons forged in the timber wars will not and should not be easily forgotten, but the facts on the ground have changed and our policies need to adapt. And we've seen that cutting red tape can get results. The 10,000 acre categorical exclusions for fuels reduction in the Lake Tahoe Basin sped up treatment, helping stop the Caldor fire before it reached South Lake Tahoe. After losing 20% of the world's giant sequoias to wildfires, the Forest Service expedited NEPA review in 2022, enabling the Giant Sequoia Lands Coalition to treat 54% of groves within just a few years. Just last week, President Trump and Gavin Newsom both took emergency action to remove regulatory hurdles and accelerate fuels treatment on public lands. The people in charge of managing risk understand that they need to get at this problem. And the Fix Our Forest Act complements these emergency declarations by codifying in statute a process to ensure that these efforts are targeted and successful. The bill expands limits on CEs from 3,000 to 10,000 acres, providing land managers with flexibility to move beyond small, random acts of mitigation and towards strategic landscape-level projects needed to move the needle in a serious way. By focusing on the highest risk landscapes and the most impactful treatments identified through the fireshed assessments, the reforms in this bill target the most critical work on the ground. Over the last few years, we've seen an explosion of technology companies offering solutions at every phase of fire. This isn't a hypothetical where we need to go, but the scalable technology already exists to make taxpayer-funded programs more effective and help us reach our goals faster, cheaper, and better. And yet, these tools remain fragmented across more than 50 federal programs with strained budgets, leaving the government unable to effectively deploy tech for those who need it most, when they need it most. The Fix Our Forest Act addresses this by creating a fireshed center to improve wildfire decision-making across prevention, suppression, and recovery. There's currently no single entity responsible for evaluating, understanding, and acting on risk across jurisdictions and landscapes in the United States. Like a combat support agency at DoD, this center will integrate real-time intelligence, predictive modeling, and risk assessments to support firefighters, land managers, and communities. And we need to ensure that the agency is built to move fast. Beyond the center, we strongly support the Wildfire Technology Testbed program in the bill to spur private sector innovation. Scaling these solutions quickly is absolutely critical. To maximize impact, Congress should consider expanding this provision to include deployment and authorize existing funds for wildfire technology acquisition. In conclusion, the Fix Our Forest Act will move the federal government towards a more proactive, science-driven approach to wildfire management. The bipartisan effort led by Chairman Westerman and Representative Peters has produced a solid product, and I look forward to working with the committee to strengthen and refine this bill to maximize its impact. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Bim, you're recognized.
Thank you, Laurel. Okay, that was Matt Weiner, and we're going to move to Jen Tyler, and that will be our last video, and we can start questions after that, after we take that little break. So Jen we're skipping a lot of her talk, but we will get to where she's addressing some of the opposition. We are not going through everything, since I think some of you may have already seen it before.
All right, let me load the sharing, and I'm going to go ahead and share for sound. Now you're seeing our training page on community, and I'll try to make it big. Let's see, start playing. Oh, I'm hearing that bad noise again. It's weird. I don't know why it does that sometimes. Let me try it one more time. In the meantime, Mary's putting some links if you didn't see those before. We'll try this.
The CCL team started lobbying in favor of it, went out to a bunch of different offices. We didn't quite mobilize you all yet because we were so focused on permitting reform last Congress. We had our hand in a bunch of different things. But this Congress, it's been reintroduced, and it was really quickly moved to the House floor. It passed last Congress with a bipartisan vote in the House, so that's why it was able to move to the House floor really fast this past month. It passed the House recently by a vote of 279 to 141. And as you can see, there were 215 Republican yes votes and 64 Democratic yes votes. So I want to highlight this. A lot of climate bills, environmental bills, we tend to think are Democratic leaning. There's more Democratic votes in favor. We really need to focus on the Republicans, is what I hear a lot of people say. Now, as we're leaning more into this permitting reform work and things are changing, the challenges that we're battling are different. It's switching sometimes, and this bill is a good example of that. There's a lot more Republican support for this bill than there is Democratic support. There's no Democratic support. It's a very bipartisan bill, as you can see, with those 64 Democratic yes votes. But really, a lot of what we need to make our argument on, and a lot of the convincing we need to do, is going to be on the left side of the aisle. Now, between last Congress and this Congress, we've seen some really good improvement on support for the bill. There were 9 more Democratic yes votes this Congress compared to last. We saw additional votes from members in the Historic Black Caucus, Congressional Black Caucus, from Democratic leadership, as well as some progressives. So we're seeing things shift. We also saw 24 California Democrats vote yes and only 15 vote no. So you can see the impact from these wildfires. When it's happening on the ground, the minds of members are really changing. So the bill has passed the House. We're thrilled about that. And now it's awaiting consideration in the Senate. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Here is a list of supporting organizations. I bolded some of the ones that I think might be relevant as you all start thinking about your member and what argument might make sense. But some highlights I'll point out: the National Congress of American Indians. It's really hard to have a land management bill supported by the National Congress of American Indians, because it's a high bar. They have really, and rightfully so, high standards for what they want to make sure the federal government is doing. They want to make sure they're included and it's collaborative and respecting the rights and values of those tribal lands. So this is a big endorsement there. So if you have a member or you have tribal lands in your district and the member cares about that, that's a really good one to highlight. The American Forest, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. There's some good environmental groups who are endorsing. And then there's also some industry, some utility folks. So there's Edison Electric Institute, there's the National Rural Electrical Co-op Association. So there's some different folks, depending on what you think your senator might be most keen on hearing from. There's different groups that you can kind of pick from. All right, now let's get to the fun part. There's, as you might have heard, there's a good amount of opposition to this bill from some of the environmental groups out there. I'm going to go through the major opposing arguments and our response to those arguments. We feel really solid here in our support for this bill, as we do in our support for permitting reform. We have to really move these things forward in order to make a difference, and there are some changes that need to be made to how we permit things, how we get things done, and that includes some tweaks to environmental processes and standards. And it can be scary, I know, when we talk about categorical exclusions and things that might impact environmental reviews, but if we're not acting quick, as we see in California, forests burn. So our argument about endangered species is irrelevant if the forests are all going to burn and those species are going to go with it. So the first big argument that people have against the bill is that it's undermining these core environmental protection laws like NEPA. Our response to that, the bill doesn't alter or amend NEPA or the Endangered Species Act in any way. It does provide these emergency authorities like expanding categorical exclusions and some other emergency authorities for the Forest Service, but those are only as it relates to dealing with some of this wildfire risk. So these are warranted given the growing risk. It makes sure that if we're talking about endangered species, we're talking about endangered habitats, we need to preserve that habitat. And we can't do it at the rate we've been doing it. If things are taking 4 years to get approved, the forests are going to burn while we're negotiating on that forest management plan. And that doesn't make any sense. But NEPA and all of those environmental review processes are still very much in place. This does not modify them in any way. Another argument, it exempts logging from environmental review. This does not allow all of a sudden for the Forest Service to start logging every forest in the country. It does allow for categorical exclusions, like I said, to be increased to 10,000 acres, but all the practices in this bill that it's meant to allow are scientifically proven methods to reduce wildfire risk. So if that means thinning out a forest, if that means dealing with vegetation, that's what would happen under that forest management plan. It does not all of a sudden open the door for all of this logging and industry to come in and just log and clear cut every single forest. Preventing citizens from holding federal agencies accountable, that's the pushback on some of the litigation provisions. But this, again, it places this bill, this forest management process on the same playing field as many surface transportation projects, energy projects, and aviation projects. The litigation process is way too lengthy as it is with a lot of these projects, and so we're seeing these different forest management projects held up for years and years, and this just makes sure that we're streamlining things. There's still a pathway for litigation if it's necessary and is reasonable, but it makes sure that a lot of those frivolous lawsuits are not coming up. Next steps. All right, so now is a great time. If your member voted in favor of this bill, and we included a link here in the presentation, now is a great time to send them an appreciation, post on social media, thanking them for that support. It's a lot of House members, as you saw, over 200 Republicans, 64 Democrats, so I'm sure a lot of you will have some thank yous you can send out. And just express to them how meaningful it was, especially those Democrats who might have been getting some pressure to vote no. The fact that they voted yes was a really positive sign. In the coming weeks, we're going to start giving you guidance on the Senate side. Please don't start reaching out just yet because we are holding off to figure out exactly the most strategic time and the best message to bring to the Senate on this bill. As soon as we're ready for you to reach out to your senator, we will let you know. But in the meantime, look through this PowerPoint, start thinking about the bill and think about what specific angle is going to be relevant to your member. What do you think are the arguments that are really going to cut through and get to your senator and convince them that this is a bill worth supporting? So
I think we can stop here, Laurel. I think I missed part that would have been possibly more helpful for her. And Dave is a retired forester. He has a BS in forest science, silviculture, and soil science, an MS in forest ecology. His thesis was on old growth. He had a 37-year plus career in with the U.S. Forest Service. He worked in the field on ranger districts up through the national office when he retired 10 years ago. He worked in project and forest planning using the alphabet of laws, NEPA, ESA, CWA, CAA, and NFMA. I'm not sure about that one. He is a forest landowner and currently president of the Montana Forest Owners Association. He's a member of the Lolo Restoration Committee on the steering committee for the Montana Prescribed Burn Fire Council, a fellow in the Society of American Foresters, and a member of the Blackfoot Challenge. He has written and spoken extensively on the role of forests in addressing climate change and carbon management. He has been a member of CCL since 2018. So, Rich, can you, well, do you have any opening words there, Dave, or do you want us to get Rich to start asking you questions?
That was a good background on me. I guess, oh, it reads backwards. My sweatshirt says, "May the forest be with you." I'm a serious forest geek, very interested and supportive of old growth and other biodiversity issues. I'm also a very serious advocate for the use of wood in place of concrete and steel and aluminum and energy intensive materials. And I don't find those things in conflict in the least. So just to give you a little bit of my personal beliefs and that will reflect in my biases. We're all biased in just different ways. So go, Rich.
Okay, I will read through the questions in order that they're being voted up. Start with this one. So in Oregon, which is wetter and trees are bigger than here in the Rocky Mountains, it was demonstrated that when a catastrophic wildfire hit an old growth stand, it laid down versus the same fire going through a cut, thinned or younger stand. And I guess this is referencing the biscuit fire. Old growth is an essential habitat feature, even moderates weather. These old trees, many 100 to 500 years old, are essentially irreplaceable. With climate change, some species in our summers may not be able to reproduce. How will this bill address that?
I guess I would say that fires in 2020 that ran through Western Oregon actually torched some pretty impressive old growth stands and forests. And so the amount of dryness and the wind-driven nature of that event even overwhelmed those forests. But those old growth forests do tend to hold a lot of moisture. The down woody debris in there, the density of the forest on the west side, and I'm talking specifically about coastal Douglas fir old growth forests, because old growth is very different in different ecosystems. And so you cannot and should not think about old growth as a uniform thing. You have to look at it in the context of the forest ecosystem and the environment, the climate and weather systems that it exists in. So this bill is not going to authorize going in and wiping out old growth forests. It is directing the development of fire sheds and analyses and assessing the top 20% of those fire sheds, and based on risks related to communities, municipal watersheds, and other kinds of biological values. And so what I would suggests the likely outcome is that there may be treatments done in the vicinity of these high value old growth areas to reduce the risk of a raging megafire taking out that old growth. And I would just give an example of some treatments that were done here in Western Montana that accomplished that precise thing. There were a series of treatments done, and it included some treatments within the old growth and around the old growth stands, and they came through just great. Well, hopefully that gets at that question.
Okay, I'm going to skip to another just below, but another question is kind of related to what you touched on there, Dave. Are there enough guardrails to prevent the new secretaries of federal agencies from circumventing the intent? It sounds like you just talked about the intent is not to go in and raise old growth, but to protect it by doing thinning. But the concern is guardrails to prevent misuse of this law.
Right. So what I would say is that this law doesn't eliminate the forest plans. Danielle talked about those, and so the guidance in those forest plans and forest plans that I'm aware of in my part of the world, I certainly have not looked at all the forest plans across the country, but they address old growth and the value of retaining that in the forest, and so I don't anticipate that there's going to be this raising of old growth forests, and if that's going to be done, if people are concerned about laws being broken, NFMA, ESA, those other laws can be broken as well. So I don't think this law eliminates that. And I think an important point that I should make here, a lot of discussion around categorical exclusions. And that eliminates environmental review. That is completely wrong. What the categorical exclusion does is it excludes the need for documentation that would normally occur with an environmental assessment. So the analysis of that proposed treatment still goes on. So you're still going to have the wildlife biologist, the fish biologist, the hydrologist, the fuels management person, the silviculture, the archaeologist, the landscape architect. All those people are still going to come in. That interdisciplinary team will design the project to meet the forest plan allocations and goals and objectives. And so what the CADX does is allow the agency to not do all the documentation, and that can be several hundred pages long. And so the consideration for endangered species and sensitive species are all going to be done with that. And within the CADX regulations, there is a phrase, it's called extraordinary circumstances. And so if in that analysis, there are some extraordinary circumstances identified, it may still require the development of an environmental assessment. And so CADX is not a free-for-all. I think that's a hugely important point for people to understand.
Let me follow up on that just a bit, Dave. Does a CADX, though, provide allowances for public input? Because I heard that concern at the Senate hearing as well.
Yes, when a proposed action is put forward the forest will still, they've got a list of projects that is announced to the public. And so that it's not like this is done hidden. It is handled like every other NEPA project. And so that announcement and that opportunity to engage is still there. The other thing that I would say is if you look at the sections on the fire shed assessments, you know, that goes through and all the forests will have fire sheds designated. And then they basically are going to prioritize the top 20% for action. You can see in there that local, state, and tribal governments can have the opportunity to engage in that fire shed assessment. And that's not a NEPA process, and it specifically says that. But that's, again, another place for the public to engage.
Okay, switching a bit, question having to do with permanent roads. What does the bill have to say with roads? This was, I'll speak for myself here because I actually wrote this question. Timber harvest is really damaging to long-term ecological values and not part of the road by itself. It tends to be more damaging in the roads built to get at the timber. There's some language on roads, but it's a little bit unclear. There are places where it's a little bit unclear whether that additional roading would be sort of allowable with the efforts to treat.
So I did a search on the bill looking for permanent roads, and it does allow for some permanent roads building, but it's not willy-nilly. And then in places it talks about allowing for permanent roads that might replace other roads that currently exist. And I'll give you an example on this project in the Seeley Lake District of the Lolo National Forest that was put together, and there was a permanent road that went up the bottom of this drainage. And so it was, you know, built, I think it was in the 60s, and it was very close to the stream. It was problematic from a water quality standpoint, from a fishery standpoint, from a riparian habitat standpoint, and it's in grizzly bear habitat, and bears, both black bears and grizzly bears, utilize riparian zones as travel corridors in a disproportionate way to the general forest. And so that road was closed and converted to a trail. And so there was an existing road, several existing roads, but they didn't connect. And so they built a connection between those roads. And so you had a net increase of permanent road with that new construction, but overall you had a net decrease in roads that were eliminated in that. The other thing I would say, and it talks about temporary roads, and those are required to be closed within 3 years after a project has been completed. The reality, given Forest Service budgets, almost all new roads that get built are not open for general public recreation use. They're developed for management, whether it's a harvesting project, being able to do prescribed burn, you know, a variety of purposes. But those roads are typically either gated and closed that will allow administrative use by the Forest Service, or you've got a special use permit, you know, a utility, or there's a communication site. And so those, you know, people holding the special uses can access and use that road. But often many of those roads are blocked in the initial 100 feet or whatever, so that it's not easy to violate those closures. And part of what drives that is the agencies, both Forest Service and BLM, do not have enough budget to maintain all the open roads that they have right now. So the idea of adding additional roads that they would have to maintain isn't something that the district ranger or the forest supervisor is going to want to do unless that road has other real specific access needs, whether it's for recreation or, as I said, these other kinds of uses. So I think the concern there is way out of proportion with what might be developed. One last comment. Over the last 20 years, 25 plus years actually, the number of roads on the landscape has decreased. You know, a lot of roads were built in the 60s and 70s, in the 80s, and the logging system technology has improved dramatically over that time period. And so a number of those roads aren't needed anymore to be able to manage the landscape. A lot of those 60s and 70 roads were built before we had developed and incorporated a lot of engineering techniques. And so that one I gave you is an example. And so the impacts of those roads are dramatically reduced. And when they're closed year round, then you don't have that use. And so then the sediment and the disturbance of wildlife habitat is dramatically reduced as well. Next one.
Okay, the next one comes from a wildlife biologist, mostly in Oregon, and I'm wondering if you are on the call, maybe it makes sense to can you unmute yourself, or can you allow unmute? Because I'm not sure I will do justice to this question if I try to read it. It's from somebody with 40 years experience in forestry, mostly in Western Oregon. Are you on the call?
I'm wondering if that's Carol Jorgensen. She's here but muted. Okay, let me see if I can try to unmute you, Carol. Bear with me while I find you.
Is that you, Carol?
Ask to unmute. Yes, you're on your iPad. I just asked you to unmute. So you should be able to unmute if you click on the Zoom on your iPad, perhaps.
If this doesn't work, I'll just go ahead and read it. We'll do the best we can with getting it translated.
Okay, yeah, Carol, if you can try to unmute, otherwise, Rich, go ahead and see if you can do her question justice, please.
It says, yeah, she's here, but muted. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll read it, and then Carol, if you can unmute, you can go ahead and interrupt me. As a wildlife biologist with 40 years experience with forestry, mostly in Western Oregon and in mining, I found that CADXs under current acreages often missed essential ecological concerns to comply with Migratory Bird Treaty Act, Baldwin Gold's Eagles Act, ESA, and others. Field inspection of stream and terrestrial habitat was essential to identify these small but areas requiring special withdrawal, seasonal restrictions, modified project designs. Most bios with the Forest Service and BLM found that the time authorized for field inspection was inadequate to evaluate a project under current scenarios. These misses of key recommendations were sometimes responsible for legitimate protests and sometimes lawsuits by the public to ensure projects complied with laws and regulations. So I guess the concern is—
I see Carol is actually unmuted. Carol, can we hear you?
Yep.
Was that your question, Carol?
Yep. Yeah, I have had a lot of experience with categorical exclusions that were basically rubber stamped to allow a project to go forward that was politically feasible. In there's times when they make sense. 10,000 acres in Western Oregon or in the northwestern Montana would have a lot more impacts than 10,000 acres in Eastern California, where it's a brushland. It's those isolated patches of sensitive species or cultural areas or invasive plants, all things that people have to be concerned with, cultural affairs, that you cannot anticipate at a 2 square mile area in a short time frame. So that's my concern, that some of the language that was used as a countermeasure to some of the complaints was that this isn't weakening any of the laws, but there's cases in the law that say NEPA will not be necessary in this place. We will not be needing this extra consultation with EPA and ESA. So that's where some of my concerns are. I've had to practice with some of these wording at the field level and know that the actual words in the bill are the ones that are going to matter, and they're going to get interpreted in a very liberal way.
I'm not going to disagree with your experience. I would say that different line officers within the organization will respond differently. And, I think that's, becomes, really important to have those conversations. But, I can't say that it doesn't happen. I can say that in many places, the analysis is done and then it is looked at. And to me, that's where those extraordinary circumstances need to be brought up. If there are sensitive species, then that's the role of the interdisciplinary team to raise those issues. And I would say if there are publics that are involved and they see these fire sheds, the fire sheds are a very small subset of the overall landscape. And so I think it's important for people that have the concerns that you're expressing, that they engage and look at where those fire sheds are and whether if they know that some of those kinds of habitat features are in that fire shed and raise that up. And that's before the NEPA process ever starts. So I think that's part of the accountability process that NEPA provides, and we need to use as citizens and organizations the tools that the law provides. I'm not going to say I haven't seen people abuse their authorities and get away with it, and other times they get caught. And that's the system. That's a human being problem that can't be solved by the law.
Well, I want to clarify myself. One reason I muted myself is I don't communicate very well with my mouth. But I agree with you that categorical exclusions can be wonderful, and the idea is that you would find these sensitive areas ahead of time. The reality is, when you are on the ground and you have 3 days to clear a project, which is kind of the situation now, you don't have time to go out and do seasonal inspections to see if there's sensitive birds or listed species or rare plants or cultural areas or sensitive geologic areas. You don't have the time to do that inspection. And so you're going forward with information that you don't have. And that's under the current scenario. With going to a 2 square mile project area, the specialists don't have the time and support to go out and do those clearances in the timeframes that this is causing it to happen.
So I guess the other thing that I would say and was illustrated in the hearing is that, this bill doesn't have appropriations to go with it. And I think, that is something that CCL wants to, stress, is that, if we are going to accelerate and deal with the emergency, and I very strongly agree with what Matt said, that this is an emergency and it's been around for 25, 30 years. I've seen damage, environmental damage from severe wildfire. I've stood in the bottom of drainages that got eroded down to bedrock, and the raw slopes were over what I could reach, reaching over my head. So there's a balance of harms here that has to be weighed out. And I appreciate that language being included in this bill when we're doing the judicial review. And I think that's this is a serious challenge. And if we're going to do the work in an expeditious fashion, we need to have the agencies need to have the budget to hire the staff to do the work that assures the CADX is done appropriately. And to me, the opportunity there to, with kind of the examples that you're giving is, just to say, we're going to stay away from that area. It's not going to be part of it. If there's some, migratory bird things, we're going to include the mitigation into the silvicultural treatments that's going to facilitate that habitat. These are all doable things. I think your point is there has to be the resources available for the work to get done. And I think that's what needs to be brought forward in the Senate testimony, is that this is all really good to accelerate the work that gets done to address the emergency, but we need to have the resources and the staff to do it. And I've been involved in a series of letters being written by organizations that I'm involved in to our members of Congress, saying that, in Montana, we've just had about 360 positions and people eliminated by DOGE. And these are the people that are on the ground. It's, people doing sale prep, but it's also fish biologists and wildlife biologists. And so we've got parts of the administration that are working at cross purposes. And I think that's something that we can bring to our members of Congress so that they fully appreciate, that we want this work to be accelerated, but we want it done well.
So let me move on, because I think that's a good segue to the next question on the list, which was more strategic from the CCL perspective. What are the upsides and downsides of CCL prioritizing this legislation? It seems likely to garner the support of a lot of the senators.
Honey, can you feed the pets? I'm still on my.
In the West, does it? And I guess what you're alluding to too as well is going to be another part of the question, and that is CCL saying, pass this even if we can't improve it, or we like a lot of this, we want to see it improved. I mean, I guess that's a question almost for the CCL leadership in Washington. But could you comment a little bit about, the upsides and downsides of CCL making this a priority to be in pushing and favoring?
Yeah, I'm going to shift my computer so I've got the sunshine coming in the window. That's kind of. So I think CCL has the opportunity with our number of members are present in every state to engage on this and make sure that it's as good a bill as possible. I think, as Jen said, there's tremendous amount of very positive. I think the appropriation question is a very significant one. If you give authority to do these things, but you don't have the staff, it's not going to get the job done. And the idea of partnering with states, with tribes, using stewardship agreements that NGOs like the Nature Conservancy and the Wild Turkey Federation and more can really expand the capacity of the agency to get work done. So it doesn't have to all be agency employees, but we need to be making the case that the capacity is there, and that takes money. If we're going to have tribes involved, if we're going to have stewardship agreements with these NGOs, there has to be money to facilitate that. And so, and I think, Matt's point on the return on investment is extremely important to be making when we go into those offices, is that the benefits, the financial benefits of doing this work pay back many times over. There are publications that have been done that talk about the true cost of wildfire, because we often get fixated on the cost of suppression when the cost of post-wildfire effects, the rehabilitation, damage to infrastructure, roads, power lines, water lines, homes, municipal watersheds, are 2 to 10 times greater than the suppression costs. And so we need to be making very clear that this is an investment in prevention and in maintaining our biodiversity, maintaining effective watersheds, and as well as getting wood out. And I think we also want to be able to talk about that the use of wood in place of concrete and steel and aluminum is extremely climate friendly. And if we have time, I've got some slides where I could show some of this stuff and some of the effects of some very large wildfires and how management has been implemented when the fires encounter those, and it's dramatic, the changes that get made. So I am 90% plus in support of this. To me, there are some tweaks, and for me personally, and with 49 years of working in the forest, 37 plus with the agency, and then time since I've retired. My wife says I've failed retirement, but I'm passionate about this, and the carbon benefits are tremendous. And so I think it's tremendously important that we get this across the finish line.
So I'm going to take advantage of my prerogative being the question answer to kind of push a little bit, because I suspect that this is on the minds of people as well. And you mentioned that you were part of a letter writing team objecting to the loss of Forest Service jobs, and I guess they've been at least temporarily put back by a judge, but who knows what's going to happen. But if the response continues to be no, we're not going to resource these agencies. We still want to pass this bill, but we're not going to resource it, and we're going to do everything with half as many employees or whatever, Elon Musk and those guys want to do. I just wonder where is CCL, if that's the response, the only response we can get. No, we don't need people. We don't need money. We're going to do it. Because what I'm hearing from you, Dave, and some other people, and I think Carol's comment spoke to this as well, is, this stuff can work, but it also requires some care, and that requires resources, money, and people.
Yeah, and to me, we need to be making that point to our members of Congress, and our members of Congress are our people that are responsible to provide oversight to administration. And I worked in the Forest Service, and Congress provides that oversight, and so we need to be making clear that they need to fulfill their role. And I guess the other thing on the financing, we have authorities and we have places where there are opportunities to utilize trees that need to be cut and to generate some revenue that then helps finance the Good Neighbor Authority. And so there can be a positive feedback loop. There can be some funding that then allows for more work to be done. The reality is we have parts of the landscape where there won't be any revenue generated. It's all cost. And those need to be addressed too. And so, we need to have that conversation. And so I guess I'm just reinforcing, your point, Rich, is that the wood products industry and having an innovative sets of new products that can help us accomplish climate goals, which there are, and I can talk about, cellulosic nano-sized particles and what it can do to help reduce the carbon footprint of concrete, the use of mass timber, the use of wood fiber insulation in place of extruded polystyrene that is a petroleum-based product. There are lots of things, and I think, to me, the power of CCL is that we need to be looking at this wholly and integrated, and this is one bite of the apple. And I think both Jen and Danielle talked about this isn't the last piece of legislation that's needed. And so we need to move things forward, and we need to push hard for that oversight responsibility and funding, because Congress is in charge of that. The administration is not. The administration creates a budget and submits it to Congress, and they might submit a budget that's half of what is needed, but Congress has the responsibility and the authority to appropriate the money that is needed to get the job done. And so that's where we need to be talking to people on the appropriations committees to make sure that this goes with it. And I guess that's a detail that I became aware of as I moved higher in the organization, is that there's authorization and there's appropriation. And so this bill, and is an authorizing bill that gives the authority to the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Interior. The appropriations committees have to appropriate the money. And so the fact that those are separate is because there are different parts of Congress and different bills that do that work. And so that's just some devil in the details kinds of things there.
Okay, so a couple of questions are a bit more in the weeds, but I think we should go there. One, talk a bit more about fire sheds. FOFA the bill talks about focusing on the top 20% of nearly 8,000 fire sheds with greatest fire risk. And I had noticed that the Forest Service has a website that shows some high priority, which I thought was a top 20%. So I guess I'm a little confused myself. Is that already the fire sheds that are going to be prioritized by this bill if it passes? Or is that basically just a draft and it all starts from scratch with the provision of the new fire shed teams?
I am certain that it will not be started from scratch. You know, the agencies, the Forest Service, the BLM are going to use all the work that they've already built. And so a fair amount of this exists. And the Forest Service has a strong research arm, not as strong as I'd like it to be. That's another financing piece of it. But these fire sheds have been something that our fire researchers have developed. They, in conjunction with that, they've identified boundaries that make sense to try and contain fires, you know, using natural features in the landscape. You know, once a fire escapes that early attempt to suppress it, then it becomes important for the incident management team to say, okay, where can we be effective in halting this? Where can we do some back burns? And these prescribed fires, these harvests in conjunction with pile burning and broadcast burning are all pieces in the landscape that can really benefit those incident management teams when they're in the fire suppression mode. You know, they are going to build off of the work that they've already accomplished. They're not going to start from scratch.
So you're probably better situated to I don't think you can make an exact estimate, but can you give us a sense of how much of the landscape in, for example, Western Montana, or perhaps Oregon, if you can, are likely to be included in these high priority fire sheds? Are we talking half the national forest system, or 10%, or it's a little, for the non-experts, a little unclear.
Yeah, I get that. I'll refer to out of the Farm Bill, the last Farm Bill that is overdue to get reauthorized. And actually, it was the previous Farm Bill to that. It put the burden on the state forestry programs, so the state forester, to develop a forest action plan for their state. And part of that process is to assess fire risk, insect and disease risk, bring in watersheds, and, you know, kind of some critical things. And so in Montana, that latest plan was completed in 2020, I think it was 2020. Yeah, I think it was 2020. It identified 9 million acres of high risk from fire and insects and disease. That's in context of, and I think this number is pretty close, about 22 million acres of forest land in Montana. So you're looking at 40% of the land that are high priority, or no, I shouldn't say that. Got to be careful with my language, that are high risk. Now the fire sheds are going to break those down, those 9 million acres down. And then there are factors that they're going to use, and it's communities at risk, municipal watersheds, critical habitat components. And so then they're going to look at those fire sheds and look at those factors and say, this fire shed has more community risk, more municipal watershed risk. And so that ends up being the highest priority. So we may have in Montana 40% of our fire sheds that really need treatment, but we're only gonna we're gonna sort those out by priority. And I think that's why it's important in there. If you look at the language, this priority of fire sheds will get updated every 3 years. So hopefully we're doing treatments and some of those fire sheds move down because we did the work. Then we're going to shift to other priorities. And so that to me is how this will work. And they've done this assessment across the whole West. So every state is going to have that kind of baseline analysis available.
So let's switch a little bit to more, again, weedy stuff. Talk a little bit more about treatments, because the bill seems to allow for all kinds of, I mean, it talks about certain treatment, but it doesn't really specify. There are some questions having to do with ground disturbance. I had a question about language in there that sort of says, this allows you to remove trees, including dead trees and diseased trees and any tree that might be, and I mean, I think my guess is that, Dave, you have some ideas about the kinds of pre-fire treatments that you would see as being useful, but I'm just wondering if the bill does the bill give you confidence about that, or does the bill allow for treatments that in these areas that might not be the ideal treatment if you wanted to both be ecologically sensitive and reduce fire risk?
So I would say that language describing exactly what is going to be done on the ground is broad. It's talking about mechanical treatments, and it can include harvest and prescribed fire and mastication, and those techniques are appropriate in different situations. And so the bill shouldn't try and get specific on that. We need to let the people on the ground to determine where and how that should be done. And so this is getting weedy, but I think you will appreciate it. This restoration project I alluded to on Seeley Lake. They had an ID team and they designed the projects. They looked at where the prevailing winds come from, and so the direction that a wildfire would likely be headed. And they looked at, there were private land, some homes, some recreation sites around a lake. There's infrastructure, power lines, and there's grizzly bear habitat, bull trout habitat, which is a threatened fish in western Montana. And they designed the projects to mitigate that fire risk. To me, and that comes out of research. I mean, our fire researchers have identified, you don't need to treat 100% of the landscape. The really great thing is you can treat, around 30–35% of the landscape, radically change fire behavior. But you need to do it in patches that are large enough and oriented to the progression of the fire and arranged so that the fire, when it hits those areas, it lays down. It may burn through it, but it with a much lower intensity. And so then when it comes into an area that hasn't been treated, it's not going to roar off. And by the time it builds up the energy that can really take off, then it encounters the next area that has been treated. To me, from a practitioner standpoint, we went out and looked at this Colt fire that happened about 4 or 5 years after the treatment was done, and it worked just like you wanted it to. And we protected the old growth. The impacts in the riparian areas were really minimized. It totally changed the fire behavior. And from a carbon standpoint, we still had most of the forest in those treated areas that were still alive, and they're still absorbing carbon. And so, and they did a variety of treatments, in places where you had lodgepole pine that is very thin bark species, they thinned it out and treated the fuels mechanically. That means they piled up and burned the piles in the fall when it's moist. In other places, you had large forests and you could harvest, and then they ran an underburn through there. And so in some places, they just did hand thinning, with crews out there with chainsaws, cutting stuff down and piling it up and burning it. All of those things rearrange the fuels that rearranges the flammability of the landscape, the flammability within that area that they treat. But when you have a combination of these treatments across the landscape, it changes the flammability of the whole landscape. And the science in this is solid. There was a meta-analysis done and published this last year that looked at over 40 individual studies from all across the West, and where wildfires had encountered these kinds of treatments, a variety of treatments. And the individual studies looked at those effects. And so what this meta-analysis did is it looked at these 40 studies and said, what can we learn in aggregate from all of these individual things? And what it showed, and there's a lot of details in it. I'm giving you just the broad brush overall results, is that if you did thinning and underburning, you reduced the severity of the fire on average 72%. If you did thinning and piling and burning, it reduced the severity 62% on average. If you did just prescribed burning alone, you reduce the severity by 62%. And then they also looked at where there had been previous wildfires that were kind of low to moderate severity. There weren't this really extreme wildfires. And that previous wildfire reduced the severity. And I don't remember what the percentage was, but it was a significant amount. It's highly variable, and all of these things are variable because your treatment effectiveness goes down over time. As the forest, as the system regrows, the effectiveness of that treatment declines. If the wildfire occurs the year after your treatment, you're probably going to have 90+% reduced severity. The more time goes by. And so one of the things in the paper it talked about is that you need to be able to do maintenance. You need to go back and do more underburning, periodically.
Dave, can I just interrupt for a second?
Yes.
I didn't read the whole paper, but you were kind enough to send me, and I did take a look at it. Didn't it also, that same paper also suggest that thinning only without burning or lopping had no appreciable detectable effect on the subsequent severity of a fire coming through?
I would disagree with no appreciable. Well, your point, and the point of the paper is, if you don't deal with the slash that's created by the thinning only, you're still going to get a relatively severe wildfire. And so you will see people that are opposed to this bill citing research that's been done, and some of that research said, well, if you go in and log, it doesn't really help. And in some cases, it actually can make it worse. And what is essential is that you need to do those treatments in combination. And there are many cases where you can't do a prescribed burn without doing some mechanical treatments first. Because the forest is so dense, there's so many ladder fuels that if you try and do a prescribed burn in there under conditions where the fire will carry, the probabilities of it escaping and becoming a wildfire are too great. And so any knowledgeable prescribed burner is going to say, I'm not going to touch that landscape with a 10-foot pole, and so we need to use this whole combination of tools.
So let me back up. We've got 10 more minutes, so we may be able to get to a few more. There's a lot of there's talk in the bill about the fire sheds not just being Forest Service lands, but also including private, tribal, and state lands. It's a little confusing. I mean, seems like it's a Forest Service centric bill. I know we've got good neighbor and we've got cooperative stuff, but can you clarify a little bit how you understand the fire sheds to be defined and used, given that they extend beyond USFS lands, right?
Yes, and I think that is a hugely valuable aspect, that the fire shed is going to look at the landscape and what are the risks from fire within that whole landscape. And so then what we've got several authorities, but it allows for the Forest Service to work with neighboring landowners, whether it's tribes, and you can use an authority that's called the Tribal Forest Protection Act. And so they could actually let the tribe take the lead and say there's tribal lands and Forest Service lands, and say, okay, tribe, you take the lead on this project. A thing that is important for everybody to know is that even when the state is doing analysis and work, the BLM and the Forest Service never give up their decision-making authority. So if those other entities do the analysis, they still review and have the responsibility and the authority to make that decision and be able to say, whoa, that doesn't quite meet muster for our forest plan or whatever. Often I've done some projects on my land. I've got the Nature Conservancy adjoining my land. We ended up having a single contract with a logger that came in and did a lot of that mechanical treatment. And then we had planned to do a burn across boundaries jointly, but their lawyers wouldn't sign off on it because there were some houses within, a third to half a mile, and they were risk averse. We had mitigated substantially. I ended up doing the burn. It went well. It's great. And we are looking at doing another burn on the other side of my property jointly. And so what the fire shed does is it facilitates that integrated analysis across all those ownerships. And then those ownerships can work together. There's also an opportunity, particularly for family forest owners that may not have the kind of experience I have with fire. It's a doctor who owns the land, and he says, I'm not going to go out there and do that burn on my own. But there was a bill that got passed probably 20 years ago that allows the Forest Service to do work on adjoining private land or agency land, because it will benefit the public, that there are public benefits to doing that together. And there can be cost benefits as well as just overall effectiveness of the treatments. And so that fire shed and joint analysis allows for those kinds of partnership opportunities to be executed, which then can be done more economically.
I think we have time maybe for one more question. We skipped over one. And this one is weedy, probably both literally and figuratively. And that gets back to treatment stuff. And you were talking about the importance of ladder fuels and post-treatment, either burning or piling. There's a question: if proposed biomass harvest will be a single operation harvest whole tree equipment like that used by Weyerhaeuser in Oregon, where will the green branches needles be used or deposited? These byproducts, needles and branches, contain a good proportion of nitrogen and other nutrients from the tree and are important for soil biota, wildlife, and tree regen. In Germany, which practiced whole tree harvest for decades, they found soil nutrients got depleted and tree regen was severely decreased. So that would seem to be kind of running counter to the, or maybe not. I mean, how does that come into your treatment understory / treatment thoughts?
So the potential loss of nutrients being removed offsite is a real one. Loss of nutrients from a severe wildfire that runs through the ground is even greater than those that get mechanically removed. And so then you have to look at, well, what are the trade-offs here? Are we removing some nutrients? Yes. And so then what becomes really important, and I've talked to a number of soil scientists and that have done research, is that there are some soils that are susceptible to that questioner's point. And it's particularly coarser textured soils, sandier soils. In Western Montana, we have places where there's granitic soils. The inherent ability to hold nutrients is just lower in those soils, and the buffering capacity is lower. And so that's why you want a soil scientist, a silviculturist, to be able to look at that and say, okay, we've got this kind of situation. How much of that nutrient capital are we removing? Should we be taking some of that back out on the site? Another thing that is really important is some of those nutrients in the needles are very mobile with moisture. So if you get rain on those, and so depending on the time of year when you're doing your harvest, you have that left out there on the site and you're getting rain coming periodically, you're getting a lot of those nutrients left in the soil. And so there are multiple ways to look at this. And then I'm excited about the biochar aspect of this bill. And I see that I'm over, and Laurel is turned on, so I will be quiet.
This was really great, David. It was really great. You went into such detail because you know what it's like being there. I was just wondering if you had like a couple features of the bill. What I got out of it is that these treatments appear to work a lot of the time, and that there's not enough staff money or money for staff to really do a lot of these treatments. I don't know if I got that from you, but and that it's a incredibly urgent problem. Are there any other major takeaways that you want to just say quick?
Yeah, I would, all three of those are absolutely right on. And then the other takeaway is that, is the bill perfect? No. Is it good? Yes. And so the old saying of don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so if we can get it tweaked some in the Senate to address a few other things, that would be great. If it passes as it is, I would be ecstatic for the environment, for society and smoke production and health effects and economically. And this is an issue that operates at all three of those levels. And so and from a carbon management standpoint, doing these treatments is massively important. And maybe somehow I will post some slides that have pictures that will show some of the differences it makes on the ground.
Wonderful, Dave. And everybody, please do use the action tracker and look at the all the links that are in that that we shared in the presentation links document. Have a great night.